Under Francis, Vane, Checker, Hughes in the 30s, it would shrug off its nickname of the Fuchsias and become Demons. It became the only team to have won a hat-trick of premierships twice. It would embrace the coaching philosophy of Norm Smith and play in 11 successive final series. This was the Melbourne side of season 1939. Alan LaFontaine with the football. Wartime fighter hero Bluey Truscott on his right, and beside him, Norm Smith.
There was many hands put up to want to do the job. I know Wally Locke and Dick Hingston, but check.
The ploy worked to perfection. Dyer was no threat. At full forward, Norm Smith kicked a grand final record 7 goals. At centre-half forward, Ron Baggett was devastating, while Beams was the best rover on the ground. Melbourne by 39 points.
The most unselfish player that I've ever had anything to do with. He'd make opportunities for everyone in the team, and at the detriment to himself. He was a finished player. He wasn't showy by any means, but he was tremendously effective.
Norm Smith and Dick Reynolds tossed the coin on Grand Final Day 1946. The Demons, once again under coach Checker Hughes, had made a late charge at the fore. Smith and Mueller destroyed Collingwood in the preliminary final, Mueller kicking 8 from the forward pocket. Smith, the decoy at full forward, kicking 6. Melbourne home by 65 points. A week later, 52,000 saw Melbourne kick 6 first-quarter goals to 0 and set up a 39-point win. Mueller kicked 6 to take his tally to 20 goals in 3 finals. It would be Norm Smith's last game, with Hughes resigning. The great forward applied for the coaching job, but in a split decision, it would go to Alan LaFontaine. Disappointed, Smith went to Fitzroy as playing coach. Norm Smith returned from Fitzroy as coach in 1952. Jim Cardwell had taken over as secretary, and former champion Albert Chadwick was chairman.
And then it was only by sheer, well, Norm Smith's genius that he decided that because Dennis Coulter was so dominant in the ruck, he could afford to have someone running along beside him. They call it ruck roving, but he just sent Bressy out to follow Dennis around, and that's how it evolved, really.
Smith had turned the club around. He had the players' undivided attention.
He was the greatest tactician I've ever seen. The way he played the game, he tried to instill it into the players. I never at any time in the years I had with Norm heard him ask for a player to go out and do something to another player. Not even just, only stay close, that's the only thing. But never at any time did he go out. But if a player did do it, he wouldn't discipline him for doing it.
I've found on a few occasions that Smithy could make a criticism of a player and that was it, but if you made the same criticism of that player to Smithy, you in turn got verbally belted up.
Smithy was, as Terry Gleeson said, he's hard and just. Hard and just but hey, he was hard, but he was just a bloody good bloke too.
The overall thought I've got of Norman Smith is the amount of respect that man commanded. It was absolutely staggering, and I think there was a reason there, and the reason was that there wouldn't have been anything that Norman Smith wouldn't have asked you to have done that he wouldn't have been prepared to do himself had he been playing, and that sort of came across time and time again. And the other point was that any decision that Norman Smith made was always in the best interest of the Melbourne Football Club. I couldn't speak highly of that man, not only as a coach, but as an individual.
But I was a very fortunate person to be able to be part of such a great group of players, led by, of course, Norm Smith, who was just the man.
His deputy would be Ron Barassi. Barassi had been part of Melbourne all his life. His father had played alongside Norm Smith before losing his life at Tobruk. From 17 to 21, the young Ron Barassi would live with Norm and Marge Smith. Moulded into the game's most inspirational ruck rover, he was at his most telling in the mid to late 50s, but he got no special favours from the coach.
Hardest on Brass of all the players, he wasn't. We had a nickname for him, which I can't say over on a tape, but he was particularly hard on Ronnie, I thought, than anybody else. But he was fair in the respect that he treated everybody the same. He had no favourites. Smithy never played favourites.
I'm now sorry. You know, you look back on it and you say, well, yeah, I am sorry that I went, because Smithy got us together socially. He got the love of the club into us, and mate, we were successful because of Norm Smith.
Norm Smith, Victorian coach, heading up the most powerful football machine in league history.
It would be Melbourne's 8th grand final under Norm Smith since 1954, and without doubt the most thrilling. Norm Smith and Ron Barassi, perhaps the most famous partnership in the history of the Melbourne Football Club. Smith, the fiery orator, Barassi, the inspirational leader. After the fairy tale end of the 1964 season and a 6th premiership from 8 attempts, things would never be the same again. If there was a pivotal moment in the history of a football club, this was certainly that moment. The Melbourne skipper stunned his legion of fans by accepting a lucrative offer to move to Carlton as captain coach.
It's never been closer, and Norm, he's a great man. He's offered to help me in any way, coaching-wise. Any problems, he's gone through the same thing. He's had to go, not had to go like, well, yes, he had to go, whereas I don't have to go. It's the difference between he and I when he went to Fitzroy. But he knows the trouble about leaving a club that he has had a long association with and going to a new one. And any way he can help me, well, he will. He's just great in this way.
Yesterday's drama in the big football story started when players were called to a meeting at the Melbourne Cricket Ground.
In July, Norm Smith would be sacked. It sparked extraordinary and perhaps unparalleled publicity.
Tony Charlton's Football Show.
On Friday night at 8 o'clock, Norman Smith received a letter sent by special delivery. The letter produced the bombshell that his appointment as coach of the strongest football club in the history of the game was cancelled as from that date.
Channel 9 devoted its entire football show on Sunday under host Tony Charlton to the events of the previous 48 hours. It would be one of the most talked about football insights ever aired.
Well, the time's come and I honestly don't know what to say.
Don't tell me you're stuck for words, Tony.
Maybe it's best I don't say anything. Where does it all start?
Well, it starts back, I'd say a year or two ago. I think when the committee failed to support me, or give me the support that I wanted in this writ action, it was unacceptable to me that I could work with men who wouldn't back me, men who would expect me to get the utmost from the players and demand from the players the loyalty and support, and at the other end of the line were not prepared to give me their support. That's where it started.
The crux of the whole matter was a libel suit brought against him by field umpire Don Blue.
I spoke to Len and I said, I think I'll offer my resignation, and Len said to me, don't be a fool, you owe it to the boys to keep coaching, and I felt that this was so. So he said, eat humble pie. Ever eaten humble pie? It's got an awful taste, but I ate humble pie and I tricked the committee. They expected me to blow up and they had the opportunity. Well, instead of that happening there and then, they waited for something else to happen. And it didn't happen. So then they created 2 lies. They created 2 lies and put it in writing and sent it out by special messengers just to get rid of me. No, I think there was 2 images at Melbourne that certain people wanted to destroy. In one sense it was Ronnie, and then I think the other sense it's me.
There had been suggestions that he was looking to move across the park to Punt Road and the coaching position at Richmond, made vacant by the illness of brother Len.
I'm Melbourne at this stage, Tony, I'm Melbourne. I'm Melbourne, and to talk about anything like that would be against these principles that I mentioned. I am Melbourne, and I'm Melbourne through and through. I listened to it on the radio yesterday, first time for 31 years. I've had to listen to something that I love. It's not very easy to take. I don't know what I'll do, Tony.
Is there a possibility?
And in the background, the lingering doubt over Smith's support for the clearance of his greatest player, Barassi, to Carlton. Barassi, although with another club, made a special appearance.
I would say one thing. Everyone knows it's a tragedy what has happened. But the thing that I feel is grossly unjust is the allegations that the club have made on Norm Smith's character, which I feel is wrong, and I can't understand any committee coming to this decision and allegation after knowing the man the way they have. He's been at Melbourne almost 30 years, and he's been straight and honest all those 30 years. And even if it were true, and it's not, of course, but even if it were, I mean, the fact that they didn't give him a chance or any way at all, it's beyond me, and it's a pity such a great club has seen fit to do such a thing.
Do you think the wound can be healed?
No.
It made for fiery Sunday lunchtime TV. The previous day, Melbourne had lost to North Melbourne at the Coburg ground, the Demons under the ageing Checker Hughes. That night, the team had visited Smith's home. Later, they would attend a dance at the club. The position of the players was never in doubt. On the Sunday morning, skipper Hassaman, vice-captain Brian Keneally and rover Johnny Townsend were in the studios.
I rang all players yesterday morning, and I was in touch with all players before 9:30 yesterday morning, and not one player mentioned to me that they would not play on Saturday afternoon.
The support of the legends of the club was unequivocal.
I think it would clear the air considerably if the Melbourne committee made it open to, well, mainly to the supporters of the Melbourne Football Club, their reasons for this action.
Well, Jeff, I would say that this is one of the greatest calamities that ever happened at Melbourne, and I'll cast my mind back to a little bit of history that the Melbourne Football Club started to succeed in 1933 when Checker Hughes took over, and we have been successful right through. So therefore, why at this stage of our football season, when we're trying to make the four, why we should be have our coach sacked, who is the best coach in the Victorian Football League at the moment. We've got a successful coach who built us up in 33, and I've got a successful coach. He is sacked. Why?
Smith demanded the supporters and members support him.
All I'm interested in, Tony, that the truth comes out, and the truth can only come from the people concerned. Once the truth is established, well, then I'm quite happy to accept any decision.
4 days later, Smith would be reinstated. The damage had been done. Melbourne would miss the finals for the first time in 11 seasons and not play in September for another 22 years. In 1967, Smith would end his association with Melbourne. He'd played 210 games, kicked 546 goals, been the league's leading goal kicker in 1941, was twice best and fairest, kicked a record 7 goals in the 1940 grand final, and played in 6 grand finals for 4 flags. As coach, he would take charge of 310 games for 197 wins and coach the club to 6 premierships. His departure was the end of an era. In November 1967, Melbourne farewelled Norm Smith with a dinner at the Melbourne Town Hall. Checker Hughes and Ron Barassi joined in the picture with his successor, John Beckwith.
In actual fact, he had a heart attack at half-time in the 4th last game in 67, and he said to me, walking down the steps into the Carlton visitors' room, "You take over," and he clutched his heart, and they called the doctor. So it was a very traumatic time as far as I was concerned.
Then I remember Norm Smith coming into the property steward's room, and he said, "Son, how do you feel about playing in the seniors on Saturday?" And I went, He said, "I thought you'd feel like that." And he said, "You'll be in the first ruck. You won't have to listen to it on the radio tonight. Now, don't worry too much. Come round to Marge in my place on Friday night. We had the big steak, and I wouldn't do these days to have it. We followed that up by a big pavlova and ice cream." And
Norm Smith had followed Ron Barassi to North Melbourne in 1973, but would not see out the season. Smith passed away on July the 29th. He was 57.
Norman Smith leading Melbourne into the 1946 grand final. A leader of men and a player of inspirational ability. Smith played 40 games in the reserves before finally establishing himself as a senior player. He would play 210 games from 1935, and for 4 seasons in a row from 1938 was the club's leading goal kicker. In 1941, he led the league. As a player, he was one of the Demons' best, and to this day, his 546 goals remains the club record. Part 1 of the Smith story ended in 1949, when he crossed to Fitzroy. In 1952, he would return and add an amazing chapter to the history of the game. He would become the greatest coach in football history, an honour underlined by his selection as coach of the AFL Team of the Century. He would lead Melbourne into 8 grand finals and win 6 flags, establishing one of the greatest footballing dynasties ever. In 1965, Melbourne sacked Norm Smith as coach. It was the biggest football story, not only of 1965, but one could say in football history. 36 years on, it's fascinating to relive the moment and its aftermath on a Channel 9 special from all those years ago.
I think when the committee failed to support me, or give me the support that I wanted in this writ action, it was unacceptable to me that I could work with men who wouldn't back me, men who would expect me to get the utmost from the players and demand from the players the loyalty and support, and at the other end of the line were not prepared to give me their support. That's where it started.
I ask you this because obviously there's a ready-made vacancy for you at Richmond in view of the illness of your brother, who you say will be here this morning and who has already granted us an interview which will be shown later anyhow, and because Jack Titus, who is at present coach of the club, has made it quite plain that he doesn't intend to carry on after this season.
I'm Melbourne at this stage, Tony. I'm Melbourne, and to talk about anything like that would be against these principles that I mentioned. I am Melbourne, and I'm Melbourne through and through.
Norm Smith was reinstated as coach and would continue with the club until the end of 1967, but the magic and the trust had evaporated. The glory days had come to an end. There has been no Premiership glory since. Norm Smith was not only a mighty player, as we showed earlier, but he was a leader of men, a coach without peer in the second half of the 20th century. When the AFL looked to name a coach for its team of the century, it went straight for Norm Smith.